All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we're back for another Bokeh Podcast episode. I am your host, Nathan Holritz, certainly host of the show, CEO at Photographers Edit as well, photographersedit.com, and I'll just give the company a little shout out there. You can see there on the screen for those of you viewing. And speaking of those viewing, watching live, this is a live show. So for those of you listening to the audio, you might be like, what's he talking about putting it up on screen? We're actually live streaming to facebook.com/Bokeh Podcast. Just like it sounds, facebook.com/Bokeh Podcast. We're also pushing out to a YouTube channel, which we'll start sharing here soon. But in the meantime, make sure if you're not already following us on at Bokeh Podcast on Instagram, BOKEHPODCAST, Bokeh Podcast. Make sure that you're doing that because we'll give you a heads up for the upcoming live streams. We usually do 2 to 3 a week, and then we push the audio out about a week or so after the fact. So just a heads up regarding that. Then before I introduce my guest actually today, I just also want to remind everybody to continue to look for opportunities to give back. I've been sharing about charitywater.org. I donated my $40 today before the interview. I'll pop that receipt up on screen just as accountability. I promised you all I would do that. And it's amazing really what we can do, finding opportunities to even just give a little bit. It can go a long ways, a lot farther than we might imagine at times. Look for those opportunities, charitywater.org or community organizations, international organizations. There's so many possibilities. Just look for opportunities to give back a little bit more. Highly, highly recommend that. It'll make a big difference, not only in others' lives, but even in your lives as well. All right. Well, I want to introduce our guest for today. We have a brand new guest on the show today, actually. John Mansfield is here with me. John, thank you for coming and hanging out, man. This is going to be fun.
Yes, I'm excited. Thank you, Nathan. And I just wanted to say, like, I love the charity water givings that you've been sharing. I think that's really inspirational for everyone. Like just how you said at the end there that, you know, even if it's just a little bit, like with a lot of people giving just a little bit, it turns into a lot, and it can do a lot of good to better the world. So yeah, thank you for sharing that. I really have enjoyed hearing that recently on the podcast.
Oh, cool. Well, thank you for saying that too. And of course, it's not a means of kind of tooting my own horn, if you will. I just wanted, in fact, I was really, I felt convicted. I grew up in the church, so I use the church word there, but I felt very convicted about, I guess, the lack of things that I was doing, money that I was giving to organizations like this. I'd been giving to Charity Water for years at this point now, I guess it's been, and our company's been tied to it, but I knew I could do more. I wanted to do more. And ultimately, I just wanted to kind of echo one of our guests, Shaun, who had been on the podcast not too long ago, actually, his emphasis on the need to certainly look for opportunities in our local community, but ultimately to give. I was very inspired by that. So thank you for the encouragement, and thank you for just really reemphasizing the need for us all to look for opportunities. That $40, it's crazy. That $40 translates to clean drinking water for an individual, which is really cool.
Which is crazy, yeah, because we don't think $40 is all that much. I mean, $40 may be quite a bit to you. I know $40 is a lot in some aspects of my life.
Yeah.
But like for drinking water, for an entire person in the world, it's really awesome how you can literally change a life with just $40.
Absolutely. Oh, $40 still feels like a lot to me. Like if I had $40 cash in my hand, I grew up in a family that didn't have a lot of money. So $40 in my hand, regardless of what I make now, it still seems like something significant. And yet I realize in the scheme of things, big picture, it's not. And that's why I felt like, you know what, I need to do more. So this is just one more way that I could get involved, and I'm stoked to do that. But thanks for the kind words as well, and the encouragement to everybody out there. And, you know, I should actually have this written out, but for anybody listening or watching, it's charitywater.org. And quick search, you'll find it. Plenty of information there, and you can look for opportunities to give. All right. Well, John, first of all, part of the reason I'm excited today, I have to say, and kind of break the fourth wall for our listeners, is you also have a podcast. And it's fun to interview other podcast hosts because I don't know, I tend to think that the conversation flows a little bit more freely. I'm going to pop this up on screen for everybody who's watching live, but then for those listening as well, Light Dark Co, just like it sounds, co.com. Yes. Talk to us a little bit about your podcast as well.
Yeah. Thank you. It's very kind of similar. Lots of interviews. Sometimes I'll have some solo shows. but really just help and having fun doing it. You can see that if you're watching this live,
Yeah.
popped up right now. But yeah, it's something that I wish that I had starting off. As I lacked community. I really didn't even meet another wedding photographer or photographer in general for probably 3 years
Wow.
that would give me the time of day
Okay.
and actually just like get to talk and like the whole community over competition mindset and yeah, it was just something that I wanted to put out there for aspiring photographers and even those who have been in the business excuse me, been in the business for years, just to have that community and a place to gain inspiration from other photographers and implement stuff into your business. So yeah.
It's great, and you make a really interesting couple of interesting points. Actually, one, having a resource to be able to go to. I mean, there are a lot of resources out there these days. We can get on Google and get a college education without a problem, right? And it's free.
Right. Oh yeah.
The caveat is it's not always that personal. So to actually have a channel or a series of maybe 2 or 3 channels that we can go to, where we can, I don't know, we get to kind of quote unquote get to know that person, the host in this case of the podcast, and then learn along with them. That's one of the things I enjoy about being a host is I'm not hosting a podcast because I feel like I know everything. And in fact, it's way more fun for me when I'm being educated along with our listeners. I think that's a lot of fun. They can learn along with us, which is really great. And we ultimately give them a place where they can go. You talked about community, and I want to use that just as a quick segue to encourage anybody who's watching or listening live right now. Make sure you chime in, ask questions, make comments, send us funny emojis if you want to. But that's part of the benefit of this live stream. It is something new that we just started doing not very long ago. And we're going to kind of figure out ways to build on it, but definitely take advantage. And for those of you listening to the audio version after the fact, make sure that you come join us for a few live streams and engage in the conversation. We do want it to be a community. I love that you highlight that. Let me actually transition. And this is a great segue, actually, for this next question, or my first question, really, about brand position. And I'm going to pop your podcast site back up again because you did a beautiful job of this. Brand position statement at the top, above the fold, without having to scroll down. We talk about brand position a lot, and sometimes the photographer will have a position statement on their site, but you have to scroll and go looking for it. You've got it there at the top of the page, so kudos to you for that.
Thank you. Yeah, I've learned that from listening to your podcast. I did not have a brand position years ago when I first heard about Bokeh, and then I was like, oh, brand position, what is this? Okay. So yeah, thank you for being consistent and talking about brand position throughout the years. It's definitely helped a lot of us out there.
Well, but in a day where we're dealing with so many different, we talk about podcasts. There are, I think, over a million, 1.1, 1.2 million podcasts now. I think is the last number I heard, something
and
like
more
that.
Every single day.
Oh, absolutely. Because it's the thing to do. Kind of like blogging, 10 years ago. So it is crowded. But then the photography space is also crowded as well. So that's why we talk a lot about the significance of brand position, is because we need that. We need some way to immediately tell somebody who's landed on our page, hey, this is why you should even pay attention. This is what makes us different than the million other podcasts or the million other photographers that are out there. I think that's why it's super powerful. You do this, and I'm going to pop back to the browser here. For everybody listening in, I'm looking at John's site, his podcast site, lightdarkco.com. It says, build your business, grow your community, have fun doing it. You understand what kind of information you're going to get there. And then I'm going to jump over to his, hit the wrong button here. All kinds of wrong buttons. All right, let me jump back over to your photography website. And for everybody listening in, it's allheartphoto.com, just like it sounds. We'll put all this in the show notes, of course, at bokehpodcast.com. But I love this. You deserve more than stiff, awkward photos. Yeah. And so now you're set the tone. It's an interesting kind of non-statement almost, right? You're talking about what it is that they deserve, and they can infer from that the type of brand that they're about to engage with. Talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to do. I don't feel comfortable being pushy. I think just like the way that I was raised, and also like my whole personality and Enneagram and all those kind of things push toward me not being so salesy and pushy. So I wanted something that was a little bit more where they would infer like, oh yeah, I deserve more than awkward stiff photos.
Yeah.
I'm going to assume that this guy can take some photos that are not going to be awkward and stiff. So I'm going to keep scrolling, and also tried to match that with the photos. Like I have, a little slideshow of 5 or 6 photos that go through, but I wanted to match that with photos that were not so stiff and posed and awkward, and like the arm in arm around each other smiling at the camera, 1 2 3 say cheese type stuff that
Yep.
we often think about. I remember growing up in the 90s going to like Sears and going to the photographer station
Yes.
in Sears, and like there's a picture with my like awkward hand on my dad's shoulder and
Yep.
just like hand on my hip and smile, super fake smile, holding it for like 5 minutes. And I think a lot of people think of that when, because that's like the only time that I ever had my photo taken by a professional. Growing up. So then once we started looking for a wedding photographer, that's what I had in mind thinking of what a photo shoot was. And I think a lot of
Yeah.
people have that as well. And they're like, okay, I don't want this.
Mm-hmm.
That's not how I want my photos to look.
Yep.
So I wanted to convey that on the website right away, which again, learning about brand position and trying to have that up there.
Well, but again, I have to give you props because it's one thing to say something; it's another thing to actually follow through on it. And that's part of having a strong brand position, is actually following through in that. I'm going to state what my unique value proposition is to that potential client, but then I'm going to actually deliver on that. And my argument is that really our whole business, once we establish that clear and distinct brand position, we literally need to build our business around it. Every bit of the experience that person has with us should reflect that, which honestly kind of plays well into what our conversation, kind of our primary points of conversation later in the day or later in the conversation is going to be about how to bring really great energy to the interaction with the clients. If they already get the impression when they land on your site that you are not the stiff photographer, that you like to have fun, you like to kind of step outside the box and be creative, then you've got to deliver on that when they actually get a chance to meet you. And we're going to talk about how you do that here in just a little bit. But I want to keep going. Lots of questions here.
Okay, cool.
Second question that I usually ask our guests has to do with customer experience. So you've created this brand. You know what your brand represents. You get the opportunity to begin to interact with a potential client and then maybe a client. Is there a big idea that drives what you feel is a really great customer experience for your clients?
Yeah, I think I agree. Customer experience is like one of the top main things that we should be focusing on. And really, for me, it's knowing my customers, and not just treating them like a number or like, who, okay, cool, I'm gonna hit 25 weddings this year if they book, but really getting to know them. And not just the like knowing things about them, like I think a lot of us, whenever we meet with couples, specifically, I'm mainly a wedding photographer.
Sure.
So whenever we meet with couples, we're like, "Hey, when did y'all start dating? And how did you get engaged?
Yeah.
How did he ask? All those things, and those are great questions to ask. I still ask those, but I go a little bit deeper into those as well, and I ask like what TV shows they like watching, because that is one of the easiest ways to connect with people. It's like, oh, you like BoJack Horseman too? Okay, cool. Let's talk about Will Arnett. And it's an easy way to kind of break down a little bit of that barrier of professionalism. Like I'm meeting with this photographer.
Yep.
They probably don't do a lot of a lot of meetings with photographers, so they may be coming to it with this, I have to be prim and proper, and I don't know exactly what questions they're going to ask. And then you start asking about TV shows and what they like doing on just like an average date night. Are y'all go out into nature and like go through trails with your dogs, or are you movie night, or drive-ins, or
Yep.
going bowling or whatever. And I kind of get to glean some information from them as I'm asking those questions that aren't really photography related at all. But they help me get to know them. And I also want to know about their fears and what they long for. That way I can help reduce those fears, like looking awkward and stiff in photos, and what they're longing for, which is their personalities to come through in the photos.
Yeah, you make a great point too about how it's not just about simply avoiding, or not avoiding, but maybe not making the main point the questions which every wedding photographer is going to ask. It's about creating conversation that helps break the ice, that takes the edge off, that immediately, as you pointed out, gives the impression that, okay, this guy's not stiff and boring and uber professional. Like he's actually going to be fun to work with. We can relax, which then, of course, translates to better pictures. I imagine like if instead of, and I met with who knows how many wedding clients over the decade or so that I shot weddings. But imagine if we started off our wedding consultations with something totally random, like, so tell me about the first time you went skydiving. And if they've gone skydiving, then of course they're going to be stoked. First of all, they're going to be like, what in the world is he talking about? Oh my word, it was really exciting. And then they go on. And then if they haven't, then, you figure out a creative way to segue from that into something else. But just something that totally catches them off guard, breaks the ice, helps them relax a little bit. And now they understand that they're not just here to answer questions robotically, but that they can actually develop a relationship with you.
Yeah. Yeah. And even like I've started some conversations with that, just like, hey, nice to meet you, whatever, my name's Shaun. But then like, what's your favorite candy bar? Like, what is the one, like, if you see it in the store, you're just going to buy it. Even if you're on that diet or whatever, and you're like, that Reese's, it looks amazing right now. I'm just going to go ahead and get one. Cause that's mine. And I love Reese's for whatever reason.
Wait, what's your favorite Reese's candy? I mean, there's so many different options now.
Okay. So, great question, because I love the Reese's hazelnut that you cannot get in the States. I've only seen it in Mexico, and it's not even good chocolate. It's like the kind of like powdery chocolate, so it doesn't melt, but it's chocolate with hazelnut filling, and it is amazing. And they're like, 39 pesos or something. It's super cheap in Mexico, and anytime that I go to Mexico, I just buy all of them.
You should start importing it and reselling it or something.
I know, yeah, I really should, because they're amazing. Like if you love Nutella or something, it's similar flavor because it's hazelnut and chocolate. But yeah, that one's for sure my favorite. But here in the States, just any old day, just a classic Reese's peanut butter cup is delicious.
It's so good. Yeah, and speaking of Nutella too, I mean, like, it feels like only in America would you be able to go to the grocery store and literally buy a jar of basically what amounts to liquid chocolate and just like take spoonfuls out and eat it, which I'm very guilty of. But it's so good. but I mean, this is a great example though of that type of conversation, right? We don't have to go in business only. If we're comfortable and confident in what we bring to the picture as far as a business is concerned, that frees us up to then focus on the interaction at hand. And I know that the conversations with various photographers can go different directions as far as how personal to get with an individual client. Some photographers are like, I don't have time for that, or I don't have the mental space for that. Others may want to give more. Regardless, I still think it's on us to help them feel more confident, at least in this day and age. I think there's a lot to be said for that, because to your earlier point, on the other side of the camera, they're going to be so much easier to work with than if they're stiff and worried and don't know what to do because they're uncomfortable with you to begin with. So I think this is a good reminder for all of our listeners. I want to keep going, though. Next question for you.
Okay.
Free time. You mentioned your kids briefly before we started recording today.
Yes.
So you've got family, you've got a business, podcast on top of that. How are you juggling all that? Is there a particular idea when it comes to workflow that's helped you manage your time better?
Really, the best thing that has worked is communication, for sure. With my wife and I, communication of, when she has things that she's either going to be out of the house or whatever that I'm going to need to parent the kids by myself, and the times like right now that I'm recording a podcast with you, and she is solo parenting in the other room. But yeah, communication. We have a physical family calendar that we write out everything on.
Cool.
And just that, the act of writing, it helps lock it in my mind. And then also when doing that and seeing everything written out, we can see when the really busy times are. We're like, okay, so this week is going to be crazy. Like this week is crazy. We have so many things going on, and because we're in the process of moving, and it's a lot of stuff going on right now. But like we can look at the calendar and say, okay, this week's going to be a little bit crazy, so we need to like kick it up into gear. But then next week we don't have a ton of things, so we can plan to schedule some days off to where I'm not taking meetings or doing podcast interviews. I'm not doing photo shoots in the evenings, and we can have that designated good quality family time that we now have to schedule, because it doesn't just like happen organically, because we're both very busy people and we have 3 kids, so that gets busy as well.
I'm laughing as you say happens organically, because I think there's this, first of all, it's great that you bring up this topic of communication. I think we need it just in general. It's a good reminder for us, like personally, right? I mean, relationships don't happen without good communication. Good relationships don't anyway. And then it holds true in the business world as well. Proactive communication, it's at the root of managing expectations. It's at the root of developing an ongoing relationship, a more personal relationship if the photographer wants to. We absolutely have to do it, but it has to be intentional, or it doesn't happen. And where I laughed was when you said organically, because that sounds nice, but the reality is a lot of photographers either just aren't thinking about it, or they're being lazy, or some combination of the above. And by the way, I've been guilty of that too.
Oh, 100%.
But
yeah, me too.
We have to be intentional, or in many cases it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. And really it was trial and error, or trial by fire, or whatever you want to say. But I got to a point where I was just booking because I was like, oh no, Thursday. Yeah, sure. I don't have anything on the books for Thursday. And then I would book a, family shoot or a couple session out of town or something. And then I have to travel back, and it's adding extra time that I'm away from the family.
Yep.
And it really wasn't until my calendar was just full. And I was, I wasn't overworked, because I could still do all those photo shoots and edit and everything, but the family life balance was off because I was gone so much, and I wasn't looking at, I was just seeing those empty days, and I was like, oh, I can fill that and make more money, or I can fill that and, meet another couple or whatever. And instead of having those designated days, Monday nights are family night.
Yep.
And we just order pizza, and
Yes.
we'll watch a family movie or something.
Yeah.
And that's just our Mondays. And every now and then I'll have something that has to be booked on a Monday. We had a crazy monsoon in May, where just every single day in May it was raining. So beginning of June I had to do a couple Mondays where I had a photo shoot. But through communication, we were okay with that, and we were like, okay, we can plan for this, and it's, they can still do pizza and watch a movie. I'm just not there. But
you mentioned using a physical calendar. Is there a reason you use physical calendar versus just a shared Google Calendar or an Apple Calendar or something like that?
Well, we also have the shared Google Calendar as well, just to have that, on the go. We can look and be like, okay, the 13th we're going to be busy. The physical calendar just helps us as we're at home, and
feels
just
more tangible.
And we've now upgraded to 2. They're dry erase calendars. Oh, okay. So we'll have 2, and then we'll kind of we can see what next month is going to be, because we have that one up there as well.
That's cool.
And it helps us more visualize what parts of the day is going to be busy, and which ones are designated for family time, because it's summer and we have a pass to the local pool, and we are taking the kids as often as we can.
That's cool.
And that is also scheduled in there. So
that's great. That's a cool thing. I mean, whether you're using a physical calendar or a digital calendar, being able to leverage that technology, or even just the whiteboard, if you will, for the sake of collective communication, management of expectations, staying on the same page, it really makes a difference. I've done it. My kids are 19 and 16, and we have a shared Google Calendar, or a couple of calendars actually, that helps keep us all on the same page. And they know, they may say, hey, Dad, do you have a podcast today or something like that? And I'm like, hey, did you check the calendar?
Right. Yeah.
Because at some point it's a lot easier if everybody's just on the same page. They know immediately, just check the calendar. They know what's going on. They can make a decision accordingly. And it makes the day-to-day a lot easier, much more smooth. And to your earlier point, when it comes to managing expectations in the context of a relationship, it's wonderful. It helps mitigate potential conflict, keeps things smooth. That's really good.
It definitely does. Yeah.
So talk to me. I mean, as it relates to time management, something we talk a lot about, of course, is delegation. And I so happen to own an editing company, but this is an applicable concept regardless. Is there something or some things in your business that you experimented with when it comes to delegation, something that you've employed in your business?
Yes, yeah, and it's kind of probably like the last maybe year and a half that I've been delegating things out, and it was a hard wall to get over,
Sure.
because I'm a bit of a perfectionist, and I was like, no, I edit these photos and I do this my way. No one else can do it better than me. But then like hearing about photographers edit and other editors where these people like that's what they do and that's what they love doing. So I'm like, of course they're probably going to do this better than I can, and they can match my style. And like,
Yeah.
there's a whole process in doing that. So yeah, I edit my or I outsource my photo editing,
Cool.
video editing. I outsource album designs. My wife actually does that. I outsource to her,
Nice.
which she loves it,
Okay.
and like does the whole like Zoom client consultations and going through, which she enjoys getting to like meet all these couples that I come home from the weddings, and then she's like, "Oh yeah, y'all are the one that had like the beer burros and stuff." But yeah, album design, and then I'm currently going through like recording my processes in just like kind of day-to-day studio management for hopefully hiring in a studio manager here pretty soon.
That's cool.
So I don't have to spend as much time emailing like the simple
Yep.
emails and all that.
So talk to me briefly about that, if you don't mind, because this is something
Yeah.
actually that's a little bit front of mind for me right now too. Photographers Edit's been around for 13 years now, and our team has grown at different levels. And one of the things that I've been thinking about more actively as of late is our processes, because whether somebody steps away from the team or we add people to the team, or maybe in some cases just for the sake of clarity on an ongoing basis, having established processes super, super important. Now, obviously, we have a pretty stringent workflow in place for our editing team, production team, but all together, collectively, especially for customer service and our brand as a whole, what is it that we represent? How do we interact with clients? Which may seem obvious, but actually being super specific about that. And these are conversations I've had with my team.
Oh yeah.
How do we communicate about the brand? How do we handle these particular customer service situations? Of course, the workflow, as I mentioned, is pretty clearly established, but just having processes established enables us to kind of, well, first of all, mitigate stress, because our decision-making process becomes much easier. The brand is represented more consistently, and then we're able to scale more effectively too. So to your point, bringing somebody on, that process of bringing somebody on to delegate to or to grow the company by, that can happen so much easier if we have an established system or processes in place. And we talk about this all the time, but delegation, the best experience in delegation comes from a baseline of understanding what it is that we want to begin with before we begin delegating. So I love that you highlight this. All that to say, I'm curious, like, what has that process felt like for you? What does it look like for you? Because I think a lot of photographers, the idea of delegation, it really in any realm is a bit of a foreign concept. I have to tell somebody else what I want them to do in order for them to do what it is that I do. And then, of course, also being willing to give up a little bit of control in that. Like, it's this kind of multifaceted process. But what does that look like for you, felt like for you? I know it was a really long-winded question, but take it away.
No, that's great. I'm used to long-winded questions. I give those a lot as well.
I'm working at it.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. But I followed you. It was good. Really, I think with how it's felt, because I think a lot of us, like solopreneurs, we're doing everything ourselves, and then delegating feels like giving up a little bit of control. But whenever you're recording your processes, and it's like, yeah, this is how our client inquiry process goes, and you do, like, I'm just using Zoom right now, and I'm just recording my screen and then doing voiceover live while I'm recording the screen. I'm like, yeah, this is this, and this is how I do this, and just kind of like talking through as if I'm like talking to a 5-year-old of like, this is how we do everything. And it still gives you a little bit of that control.
Can I interrupt you really quick?
Go for it.
I love the 5-year-old comment. And what everybody listening in has to understand is that's not about condescension. That's about simplicity.
No. Yes.
It's about understanding what it is that we want enough that we can then clearly communicate it at the level that a 5-year-old would understand it. Because I think a lot of times photographers take a little bit of self-importance, whether consciously or subconsciously, in their processes, whether it's their editing process or their shooting process or otherwise. And the reality is they've probably way overcomplicated it. Maybe don't even fully understand it themselves. If we can actually kind of downsize, if you will, simplify it, that will indicate, at least from my perspective, a better understanding of what it is that we're trying to do. And then as a result, we're able to teach that or to delegate that more effectively. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree. Yeah, I think if we can kind of boil it down to just the basic core of what it is, and like you're trying to explain it to a 5-year-old, and really going through every little detail of it, because a lot of times, the longer that we're in an industry, the longer that we're a photographer, we kind of forget that newer photographers or someone who's going to be joining your team does not have a decade of experience. So these things may not come naturally for them as it seems to come naturally for you, but really
Right.
it's just learned behavior over a decade of photographing or a decade of meeting with clients. It's like, oh
Yeah.
no, this is just how it works, right? But really you learned this. So
Hmm.
like trying to teach a 5-year-old, like, this is how we speak to our clients, and these are our core values that we want to keep in mind as we're going through every aspect of work, whether it is in-person client meetings, or if it is editing, or if it is finding a studio manager or a VA or someone, and making sure that they match the feel, match the those core values that you have, because I have talked to people and been like, "Ooh, I think they would be great to bring on." And as we start talking a little bit deeper into their values and how they do things, I'm like, "Oh, okay, well maybe we're not the best fit," and we can just kind of move on, and
Yeah.
it works out. But yeah, I think that's really important to just kind of boil down things, because it also helps you see what parts of that is yours. Like, I don't know, I'm just
Mm.
thinking of like soup or whatever. Like, if you boil down a soup, you just get left with all the flavors
Mm.
in there, and that's all the added things that are into your soup. And you boiled it down, the broth or whatever is just like the regular, like the core of all the soups and all the different photography businesses, but the seasonings in there are your seasonings, and that's what makes you you, and your studio and your style, and all those things are the added ingredients. It kind of helps you identify those, without a bunch of the broth everywhere.
Well, but I have to, the way that you talked about how this is a compilation of, say, 10 years worth of work. I can very
Hmm.
much empathize with photographers when they're getting ready to outsource something or delegate something for the first time. They've been their own boss, speaking to themselves internally or maybe out loud even, for all these years. They're used to their own processes. Now they have to try to communicate 10 years worth of information to somebody in the span of, say, a month, a couple of
Right.
training sessions or whatever it might be. That can be a little bit daunting, I realize. So I very much empathize with photographers, but it's a super good exercise as a proactive, intentional, intelligent business owner to, as you said, look at what the baseline ingredient or ingredients are. And then I
Hmm.
would say, to take it a step further, look at what actually matters. Look at the things that actually make the biggest difference in your business for the sake of growth and sustainability. And then kind of dial in on those and focus on those elements when you're communicating whatever that task or series of tasks are to somebody else. That'll make it easier. It is a process, though. It's a process.
It's
I
definitely a
laud you for
process.
making the effort. I mean, I'd love this notion of like a library of Zoom videos that you're just going to be able to
Yeah.
share. Here's my email management, and here's my calendar management, and here's my this,
Hmm.
and just have those, and you can share them with somebody. That's brilliant. I love that.
Right. Yeah, and it's even a form of delegation, because you're really delegating to your past self who was recording these videos,
Oh,
a
you got
year
super meta
down the
there.
road. Yeah, yeah. And you don't even have to pay your past self because you already did that. And
Already.
but like, if you're bringing on someone new, maybe you have a VA that you're going to be recording these videos for, virtual assistant for anyone who doesn't know the lingo. But but if you're bringing on someone and then maybe they have to move, or well, I guess virtual assistant doesn't really matter where you live, but for whatever reason they can't work with you anymore, and you have to bring on someone new. You already have these videos, you already have the processes ironed out, so you can just send them a list and like, hey, go through this. If you have any questions, let me know, or I'll have a little quiz for you, see if you were paying attention, or playing Best Fiends on your phone.
I've heard the commercials for Best Fiends. I don't think I've even looked at the game. Is it really that great?
It's fine.
Okay.
It's a time killer. Like if you want to just mindlessly do something,
Really?
it's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know. I probably went through like 300 levels before I was like, okay, this is enough. I need to just get this off my phone.
Okay, now I'm actually curious. That was a total rabbit trail, but I just heard it before. I'm like, Best Fiends? What in the world? Anyway, that aside. All right, I want to ask you one more question, then we're going to talk a little bit about energy and our interaction with our clients. Favorite book, maybe 2 or 3 books if you want. Business book, self-help book in the last couple of years, one that's made a really big impact for you.
Yeah, there are so many books, but one that has made a really big impact, specifically this last year, it's a really short book, which is great for me. I'm not a huge reader, but it's called The Stack by Shaun Gordon, and it's about serving your clients with albums, and that made a huge impact on me. Just the mindset shift of selling to serving was great. Yeah, there it is, right there.
We got it right up here on Amazon. Shout out to Shaun, who's been on this podcast, actually the most of any of our guests so far. I think like 7 times now.
Nice. Oh yeah, Shaun's amazing.
Shaun's awesome. I've known Shaun for years, but yeah, The Stack on Amazon, and we'll link to this in the show notes. Everything you need to know about pricing, offering, and serving your clients' photo albums. And you can check it out. Looks like you said it was a pretty easy read and relatively inexpensive as well.
Yes, yeah, very easy read, and very it didn't have a lot of fluff in it, which was good. It was just very concise, to the point. Like, this is what this book is about. Here are like 3 different ways that I can show you, or he can show you how to serve your clients with albums. And it really helped me, because I grew up in a fairly low income family, and asking for more money just seems weird. I'm like, you're already paying me thousands of dollars to photograph your wedding, and then I'm gonna come back at you like, hey, give me a couple thousand more and I'll give you this book. And it felt salesy. It felt kind of like, we think of the sleazy car salesman type people, of like, trying to just take advantage of our couples. Like, I'm just gonna try and squeeze out a little bit more money. But the mindset shift through reading that book was like, no, this is a service to my couples. Like, it is a service to create these albums and these heirlooms, this legacy that's going to outlive them, because these albums are great quality, that they're going to go on for 100 years or more. And it also, like, going through at my grandparents' house, just like their old wedding album, which was with the sleeves, and you put the little 4x6 prints in there, which is very different than the photo albums that we make.
I used to deliver those types of albums to my clients back in the day too, when I shot film.
Oh yeah,
I totally get it.
Yeah, but like, at the same thing, those also tell the story. They may not be like as pretty, or the user experience might not be as great as the newer albums that we do, but still having that and going through and looking at their like 12 wedding day photos that they used to take in like the 30s or whatever. That was really impactful. I'm like, this is something that I could serve my clients with, that is going to, whenever their kids are in their grandkids are in their 30s, they can be flipping through this, watching the story of their wedding day. And that really helped me, to where I wasn't feeling salesy, and I wasn't like trying to get more of their money. I was like, no, this is a service. Like, this is, I want this for you. If you go through me, that's awesome. I can give you an amazing experience. If not, please go do something. Print your photos. Don't just put them on Facebook. Like, they're gonna, I want them to live a life and not just die on a computer.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and
so
shout
yeah,
out, I have to give a shout out to Kiss too.
yes,
Kiss.us is Shaun's album company. We're talking about Shaun Austin, who's the owner of Kiss. And as you pointed out, John, beautiful products. I've had the opportunity to go to their production facility, and it's really cool actually to watch that process. I mean, literally handmade albums.
yeah,
Like where you have individuals they're folding the leather over and they're stenciling or running it through the machines. I mean, but like individuals involved in these processes, and it's almost like an intimate process. The building of these albums is really, really cool. So
yeah,
I want to give Shaun and Kiss a shout out as well, and I appreciate you sharing that book. We'll link to all of this in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com for everybody listening in. We've got about 20 minutes here, John, and I want to dig into our main topic for today, which has to do with bringing genuine energy to the customer experience. We talked about customer experience earlier and the significance of questions, how to create conversation. I want to take it a step further. And you actually, leading up to the conversation today, you talked about hearing how photographers were treating customers almost like a number. And that's honestly, it's kind of surprising to me in this day and age where word gets around so quickly. It doesn't feel like companies can really get away with that anymore. But what did some of those conversations sound like? And how did that strike you?
yeah. Same. I was like, really? There are people that like don't care about you. They're just like, yeah, just a number, whatever. Like you're gonna be another one of the weddings that I photographed this year or next year or whatever. But yeah, from talking to couples that either met with another photographer and just didn't feel right, and then they met with me and they're like, okay, I feel known here. So thank you for that, because we met with so and so and like they just weren't interested in our wedding plans, and we would talk about the special things that we were planning, and like they were excited about their wedding day, and then the photographer is just like, okay, well, here's my quote, and if y'all approve that, that's great. If not, if I'm out of your budget or whatever, then you can go find someone else. And it was just very, very cold for them. It felt very transactional. And some of them were even waiting days or weeks to get responses once they filled out a contact form, which is crazy for me, because I want to show up like as soon as I can, not just to be one of the first, because I know that there is a statistic that people tend to go with the first person who gets back to them whenever they're reaching out to multiple people for the same job, but also to just show the excitement of, hey, you're getting married. This is awesome. Like, I'm excited for you. Let's get started right away. I don't want to just like have you sit in my inbox and then be like, oh, hey, yeah. So, if you're still looking for someone, I'm available that day. These are my prices. Cause it just feels cold. And that's what they were, a few of my couples, especially recently, have been telling me that that's the user experience that they were getting from other photographers.
Wow.
Which is it's still, it's amazing that people can treat people that way in this day and age, where especially in the photography industry, where we're so about community and about being authentic and being almost friends with your couples and your clients.
Well, and I mean, despite, and in fact, because of all the technology that we have, the easy access, quote unquote, that we have to, again, quote unquote, relationships with people online, actually interacting with somebody in person, having a conversation with them, even if it is just over the phone or Zoom, but certainly in person, if we create a sense of warmth and genuine interest and desire for connection, I know there are always going to be the exceptions, but most people are going to respond to that because they're not used to it. I mean, it is odd that it still happens, that people are being treated coldly as a potential client or a client. But the reality is not everybody, even if that's not happening all the time, not everybody is getting a genuinely warm, genuinely kind person who is genuinely interested in their wedding day and in serving them, which I think is a really important word. I mean, you used that word in reference to albums earlier, but I love that word because it suggests a certain humility and, again, a genuine kindness to the experience that you're providing this person, that you are giving them a service. and doing so with a genuine warmth that I think will really make us stand out. So I want to talk about how you do that more effectively. And actually, leading up to our conversation, you talked about 4 ways, and I'm just going to read this list that you sent to me. 4 ways that photographers can bring genuine excitement to a relationship with their wedding clients. Number 1 was to show interest in their plans. Number 2 is giving insight to their planning. So they share the plans, and then you give some insight or some context, maybe some suggestions or advice, and we'll talk about that in a second. Giving gifts. And then number 4 was cheering them along through the experience. So let's first start with showing genuine interest in the client's plans. I mean, this may seem like an obvious conversation, but I still don't think it is, because I've had way too many interactions with people, whether in the photography industry or out, where you know that the person talking to you, they may have a smile on their mouth, but they're dead in their eyes. You know you're not getting a genuinely kind individual. So talk to me about how you would suggest photographers show this sense of genuine interest in their clients' plans as they're leading up to the wedding day.
Yeah, and I know, like, some listeners may be thinking, like, okay, genuine, authentic, like, those are buzzwords. Like, everyone's been talking about that for years. But when you are actually genuine and authentic in your excitement and enthusiasm for the couple, it does come through. I think they became buzzwords because people were saying them, but then not following through with actually being authentic.
Well, and if I can add a little caveat too, I think sadly, a lot of the conversation around so-called being authentic was really not about people around us. It was a very selfish conversation. Like, there's a certain amount of insecurity and not, quote unquote, being myself or being authentic. It was really a conversation about how we felt, not a conversation about how the person on the other side of us felt in the interaction. And so I think it's important to make that distinction, because what we're talking about here is, how do we make the other person feel? And are we genuinely interested in that? And I've talked about this in the podcast before, but like, when I think about genuine intention, I'm literally smiling as I'm typing a smiling emoji on my phone. I'm texting somebody, like that kind of internal intention, which is, I am trying to communicate this, or I'm trying to give this particular experience. That's genuinely going on inside of me. And I hope more consistently, even moving forward, I want to be better at that personally and professionally. But that's what I'm talking about here. Does that make sense? Does that vibe with you?
Oh, yes. Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that genuine enthusiasm comes from, I try to, if I'm meeting up in person, at a coffee shop or something, I'll just get there a little bit early, sit in the parking lot, and just try and clear my mind. And I know it may sound a little, yoga-y or whatever, but
hey, no
just
judgment
spending
here.
Right, exactly, yeah. And like, I don't do yoga or anything, but there's something about
Now, if you were still doing yoga in your car, that might be really interesting. I'd have
right,
to,
yeah, just doing warrior pose in the back seat. But yeah, just like spending that little bit of time, because you sometimes will bring things from your life into client meetings, especially over Zoom, or coming straight out of the living room with the kids, or having a bad day at your 9-to-5 job, and then you're meeting with someone and you bring that energy in. Just having a little bit of quiet time to just focus and be like, okay. And I try to say their names, because with a lot of people, I don't always remember the names, but just be like, okay, this is going to be a great time for, and then, their names. And then just trying to come in with that blank or fairly blank slate, to where I can be excited for them, and I'm not thinking about, oh yeah, well, I still have to go by the store and get all this for dinner tonight, and all the to-do things that we have, but really showing up for them fully.
I like that.
Yeah, and I know I'm an introvert, I believe. The tests have shown that. And I know that there may be some introverts listening that are like, you want me to be enthusiastic and have excitement? Like, this sounds terrible. Because like, my wife tells me that I live like between a 4 and a 7. I don't get like overly emotive. And I also don't tend to get very sad, just kind of live in the middle. But you can still show up with enthusiasm, by listening. That's one of the things that I try to do, is I ask questions about them, and then I listen, and then I ask follow-up questions. So like earlier, the questions that we talked about, like how did y'all meet? When did y'all start dating? I had a couple recently that like I asked those questions, but then I asked follow-up questions. So I asked how they met, and they met in college. And they're like, yeah, we were both doing ocean engineering, and then we met, and then just kind of like reconnected after college. And I was like, that's cool. And instead of just going on into when did y'all get engaged, I was like, I don't even know what ocean engineering is. Is that like in my mind I'm thinking marine biology, but I don't know. And then they're like, oh no, it's like mapping the ocean floor. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And like they went into what they had learned, and it was just like that little moment of I care a little bit more than just okay, cool, you're ocean engineers. But I wanted to know what exactly that means. And now I know about ocean engineering and like dredging channels for ships to go through in the Gulf of Mexico and stuff like that. And I'm like, okay, that's not something I would have known. And it ties me in a little bit more with them, and it shows that I'm interested in them as people and not just as clients. Because I can ask all the wedding related questions, and that's more of the business side, even though it may not feel super businessy. That's what they're there for. But whenever I start asking about like what they do and what music they listen to, that's a big thing. I curate a playlist during engagement sessions, so I like to know what kind of music they listen to, and if we are into the same bands, sometimes we go off for a good 30 minutes talking about cake and mute math and stuff, and just like, okay, yeah, let's get back to your wedding. Sorry. But like that endears them to you a little bit more too.
Yep. And it takes the informality out of it. I mean, you're I mean, it's cool because you might learn something from it, but you're giving them a sense of significance and showing interest in what it is that they do, what they specialize in, what they're passionate about. And that makes all the difference in the world. Again, most people aren't used to very many interactions, say in a week's time frame or a month's time, where somebody actually shows that kind of genuine interest. And we have so much still to get to, so I want to keep going. But I want to add one caveat. You're talking about introversion. We've actually spent quite a bit of time on personality types and so forth here on the podcast, because I think one of the things that happens when there's a tendency, I think, a lot in our industry in particular, because you talked about introversion in particular. I certainly labeled myself that way for a long time. There's a tendency, whether conscious or subconscious, to kind of get stuck in that box, whatever that label is, right? The personality type, the Enneagram, the introvert, extrovert, et cetera. But when it comes to the client, what I would want to encourage all our listeners to do is to step beyond whatever the label is that you subscribe to for the sake of the client. If we make it about ourselves and how we feel and how we label ourselves versus making it about serving the client, then I think we kind of miss an opportunity to create a better experience. If I go into it saying, like certainly I would have for a very long time, I am an introvert. So I just don't talk a whole lot, and I'm not really into that kind of interaction. I'm just going to get through the questions, get the information, and go because I'm an introvert. The reality is what happens on the other side of that, the person on the other side of us, what they experience is somebody who's like doesn't really care that much because the energy that they bring to the conversation is so low. It's monotonous, right?
Yes.
I love that you're being intentional, despite your tendency toward introversion, that you're being intentional and bringing that energy in a way, in this case, very specifically in the way that you're engaging, the types of questions that you're asking. But it's intentional, and it brings a sense of significance to the other person. I would encourage all of our listeners to do what John is doing, which is to step beyond that label. And I think we can all do that in one form or another and make a better experience.
I agree, and I think that's so important to do just in life in general, because, like you said, like for years I was labeled an introvert. I was a bit more on the quiet side. I tend to be like the one in the group that was listening and would be like, chime in with like a witty remark or something. But I wasn't the outspoken person, and I kept telling myself, "Well, I'm not the outspoken person. I'm quiet. I'm an introvert. I don't get along with people very well. I'm more secluded by myself. I feel good reading a book or watching a show or whatever." But I was kind of like pigeonholing myself into this thing that I had been told, or I took a quiz online and it said, you're in INFP or whatever the Myers-Briggs stuff is.
Whatever the initials.
And
Yeah.
yeah. I don't even remember. No, I just know that it was an I. But yeah, I think there's a lot, like the power of words are, it's crazy how powerful words are. And if you can speak into yourself and like, okay, I may tend to be more introverted, but I'm going to try to show up. Like anytime that I go to a networking meeting or something, for like local wedding photographers or professionals, I tell myself like, okay, meeting new people is scary sometimes, but I'm going to try and meet 3 people and like have a genuine conversation and ask a follow-up question. And then sometimes that 3 leads to more because I get in the groove. I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm feeling good now. Like I don't feel like I don't know anyone here and I'm awkward and alone.
But the key there is that you were intentional. You decided to do that thing. It's not like I grew 3 extra noses on my forehead and I'm going to ignore that. These labels aren't something that we're stuck with. They represent behavioral tendencies that we can make adjustments to, that we have the ability to step beyond, but it does just take a choice. Sometimes it may be uncomfortable, but it takes a choice. We can choose to move beyond those. And that's just the thing that I want to continue to encourage all of our listeners with. And again, I love that you're doing that and that you've made that intentional decision or series of decisions, because we're all capable of that. But when we talk about, so we start off with showing genuine interest. And really it seems to start with this idea of clearing space. And I love this because I don't think any photographer I've had in the show in 500 episodes or so has talked about it quite this way. Clearing mental, emotional, psychological space for the sake of the client before going to that interaction, and then looking for ways to help them feel significant by engaging them in conversation about them, not just professional conversation, but personal conversation about them. I think those are really great ways to help them feel significant. Talk to me a little bit about insight that you give to the planning process. You actually told me there are 4 specific ways that you do this. What does that look like in the conversation with your clients?
Yeah. So one of the first things is I provide resources to help. So even if you're in the industry for like you've done 3 weddings, you have more insight into weddings than they do. Because the odds are that's probably their first wedding. Yeah. They may not have ever been a bridesmaid or groomsman or whatever. So you have a little bit more insight and you can be like, oh yeah, at my last wedding, this happened. But I have like an engagement wardrobe guide, which is just pretty simple. I just talk about how you don't want to have like clashing colors or clashing patterns, and then a bunch of inspirational photos, and it was pretty easy to put together. But that's probably the one thing that people are like, oh, this is amazing. Like I was dreading trying to figure out what we were going to wear for our engagement shoot, and having resources like that, like sample timeline help, preferred vendor list. If there's people that you enjoy working with that are amazing and also treat their couples in a genuine way, have a preferred vendor list. You don't have to have it publicly, but you can share like, oh yeah, you're looking for a caterer. This caterer over here, like they're great. They actually walk through all these things and like ask you what kind of food you want. And then I have a wedding planning guide that's like 120 something pages of just like a bunch of stuff from over the last few years. Just a bunch of tips and help and tricks. And
did you say 120 pages?
Yeah, it's like 128 pages.
Whoa.
It's a little massive.
Like a booklet or something that you give to them?
It's right now because I'm updating it, so I have it as a PDF online, and I can just scroll through that. I have a link in their like little client portal in my client management system where they can just go in there for reference. And but yes, I'm working on getting those printed to where it's a little magazine of all those tips and tricks.
Okay, so the first way then to give insight to the planning process is resources, and I think that's really great. Yes. You're right that even again little things can go a long way sometimes. Just a little bit of guidance can make a big deal. But if we put that in a tangible resource or a downloadable one, if that's preferred by the client, that's something that can be super helpful. What's the next way?
Yeah. The next way is I'm open. And I let them know, hey, I'm here for you. And sometimes like just them knowing that they have the ability to ask me questions can go a long way. My couples know that they can call, email, text me, they can DM, and I'm going to get back to them within a day, most of the time. And just knowing that they have that open line of communication of, hey, we were thinking about maybe doing a first look. What are your thoughts on that? Which I don't get that question because I'm very open about what my thoughts are on first looks. Okay. I love them. But yeah, I let my couples know that they have that open line of communication. If they have anything, even if it's not photography related, sometimes I'll get like, hey, I'm looking at getting this veil. Do you think this goes well with this dress? I don't get that a ton, but I have had those questions, and just I let them know I'm open and available for you to just like bounce ideas off of me through the whole process.
Okay, so providing resources, tangible or otherwise, but then being one yourself, letting them know that you're there as a resource if they ever need to reach out to you. Okay, that's great. I'm literally taking notes here on a notebook. So what's the next one?
Cool. Well, my next one is taking notes.
Perfect.
and I have a tangible notebook. I don't have it around me right now, but yeah, I have a tangible notebook whenever I'm meeting with them, either on Zoom or in person, and I'm taking notes of like, oh, they're ocean engineers. Let me write that down. Maybe I can look up a little bit more about that, or I can. It really helps me remember things about them. That way, if I'm just going out throughout my day and I see something that reminds me of a certain couple, I can send them a text or a DM, or I can email them and just be like, oh yeah, hey, I was thinking about you today and just started thinking about your wedding. How are things going? Do you need any help in the planning process?
Yep.
And just, it helps me to keep them in mind as we're going through.
I like that. It feels so much more personal that way. They feel more significant because you thought of the detail. They're like, oh my word, he was paying attention when I told him this thing. And I also like that you have a physical notebook. Something I've had, I don't know how many conversations with people when I've gone to meetings with business partners or otherwise, or I'm taking notes on my phone or maybe on my computer, and I'm like, just know I'm taking notes. I'm not randomly texting people, but just so that they don't feel like I'm ignoring what they're saying. But if you have a physical notebook now, there's no question. So I kind of like, as much as I'm a digital guy, I like the idea of that physical notebook just because it does feel like you're a little bit more present with them. I don't know, little side note.
yeah. And with that, one of the reasons that I have a physical notebook is because I can usually maintain eye contact, or at least keep my head up. Yeah. And I can write a quick note. It may not be super legible, and it may not be on the straight line of the journal, but like it's in there, and I can reference that later. I can put it into the notes in my client management system later.
Yep. Yeah, it's a good thing that our listeners don't have to look at my handwritten notes, because sometimes I'm writing so fast. There's no way they'd be like, "What? No, is that a 3-year-old that wrote that?"
Right. I know. Yeah. It's terrible. Mine are the same way.
Providing resources, tangible resources or otherwise, and then being open individually as a resource.
Yes.
Taking notes, number 3, to look for opportunities to give further assistance down the road. It could be little details, and really does make a big difference when somebody's like, "Oh my word, they thought of me." What's number 4?
Yeah. So number 4 is I have a Facebook group, and it's just a group for any couples, not even my couples, but it's just open to anyone to come in, and I share tips and tricks from wedding planning. It's very photography centered, but I also have other tips in there, and I'll bring in other professionals to share their expertise as a DJ or florist or officiant, whatever, that I've been asked, like, what flowers are in season in the fall? I'm like, I have no idea, but I've got a friend. She's amazing. Let me bring her in. She knows everything about flowers.
That's really cool.
And it's a way that, like, I'm not really showing up for them because I don't know these things, but I'm being kind of a conduit to people with knowledge. And also like and also like I'll share articles that I find online about wedding planning or about certain aspects of weddings that I can share in the group and just be like, hey, I found this. And this is really interesting. Like, top 10 places to elope in Texas. What do y'all think about this? Or just like kind of put it in there for people. And I don't always get feedback, but I tend to get feedback in person. Like I recently met up with a couple, didn't even know she was in this group. And she was like, yeah, whenever you go live in your Facebook group, I'm there like every single time. I haven't asked any questions yet, but like I'm loving what you're sharing. I was like, that's awesome. Like, I didn't even know you were there, but so cool.
Well, it sounds like, I mean, man, and if we had had that resource, the Facebook group, as an option back when I was shooting, it just seems like such a powerful resource, not only for the sake of conversation, giving assistance to an individual client, but ultimately building a network. Like, imagine that you get to be like little mini, I don't know, maybe it sounds a little dramatic, but building this little mini empire, whatever marketplace that you're in, which is this network of key vendors that are working together to create these awesome experiences. And clients hear about, oh my word, you've got to work with this group. I don't know. It seems like there's a lot of opportunity there. It's really powerful stuff.
There is, yeah, and like that wasn't the focus whenever I started it, but I've had it for probably 2.5 years now, and I recently got a phone call from a coordinator I've never worked with, but she knew that I have this Facebook group. I give education, like I have IGTVs and stuff like that I'll do, and she was like, "Hey, you could probably help me with this. I have an out of state couple, they're looking for this." And I was like, "Oh yeah, here, go check out this thing." And she's like, "Okay, cool."
That's
but cool. Like, I came to mind when she was looking for a photographer in my area, and that's awesome. Like, that's what we want, is to be front of mind for people. Yeah.
Well, John, as would probably be expected with two podcasters, we're over the hour mark here. So
I know,
we're gonna try to finish up here to respect everybody's time. I want to respect your time too. Talk to me briefly about gifts. This was the third way that you were talking about bringing a better energy, or just a stronger, more genuine energy to client interaction. Gift giving many times can be a bit robotic. I mean, it's easy just to throw together a gift bag and give to them, say, "Hey, here you go." How are you more intentional in that process to make it feel more genuine, to, again, bring that really great energy?
Yeah. So my welcome gifts are pretty standard, like, because I don't really know a lot about them up front. If I do, if we have like a 2-hour consultation, which obviously I can talk, I might know a little bit more, and I'll put something in there, but it's usually about the same. And I try to do something in education. I have a little educational book for them, like as a couple, little mini book, and then also a date night in. But then after I get to know them a little bit more, sending a gift later on before the wedding, or bringing it to the wedding, or even like a post-wedding gift, I can just kind of look for things that stood out as I was getting to know them, those notes that I was taking earlier, and I can be like, "Oh, I think they would really like this," or I think that they, they're really big into the TV show Friends, so maybe I'll get them like a framed print with like their first kiss, and it says like, the one where we got married underneath, or something like that, and like that Friends font, something that's a little bit more tailored to them. But yeah, like for gifts, my rule is like about 3% of their package price goes towards gifting. I know it can get pricey.
Yeah, that's cool though. They have that specific number in mind. That's really interesting.
Yeah, and it's around. Sometimes it's a little bit less. Sometimes it's more. Especially if I'm doing something custom, it might be a little bit more. But if they're spending about $3,000 for their package, that's like $90 to $100.
Sure.
And that's still a pretty significant gift.
Yeah. You can get really creative with something like that. I think that's great.
Oh yeah.
But that's an interesting twist on it, because I used to do gift bags as well for our clients. I mean, we had clients that were spending $7,000 to $10,000 even on wedding packages, and so it only made sense to give them nice gifts. We worked with a local. It was kind of a floral shop / gift shop named Sophie's. Really, really cool place that still exists, I think, to this day. But they were very unique. And so we worked with Tamara, who's the owner, to put together a series of gifts for these clients. It was really fun to give it to them. And that was nice. But to add the personal touch, the way that you're talking about, where you get to know them, and now you have a gift that's actually created or purchased specifically for them based on what you've gotten to know about them. I think that's a really great tip for our listeners. The last question that I have has to do with cheering the client on through their wedding experience. And they may sound cheesy to some, it may seem obvious to others. Maybe there's just a big question mark for others listening in or watching. But what is it that you do? And you actually told me ahead of time there are 3 different ways that you do this with your clients. How do you actively cheer them through their wedding experience?
Yeah. So one is I befriend them on social media. I some people are like, well, I don't know, I don't want to reach out. I'll reach out. They can decline my request, and that's cool. I've had couples do that. I'm like, all right, that's fine. Also, a lot of people find me through social media, so we already have that connection. But befriending them, I put them into a saved folder. Like you can save posts and then put it into an individual folder on
Yeah.
Instagram.
Yep.
And I do that, and I just have one for my couples. And every now and then, I'll
Cool.
just scroll through their stories, and if I see that they found their dress, I'll type on, I'll leave a comment and just like, oh, that's amazing. You're going to look so good on your wedding day. Can't
Yeah.
wait to see it. And those kind of interactions as we're going and just being excited. Or if they're leaving for their bachelor party, I'll just be like, oh, this is amazing, whatever. And just those touch points to where it's not all business. And the same with emails. Like I'll send emails that aren't just logistics, aren't just like, hey, it's time to plan your engagement session, or here's a questionnaire for your wedding day timeline. I'll just send them a thinking about you email, like kind of like earlier, having those notes, sending those, or this wedding last week had these really amazing centerpieces, and I know you had talked about like not huge centerpieces, and they had some more low to the table, but still massive, and I thought about you, and here's a photo of it, and that kind of stuff that's not so businessy but brings in that relational aspect into your emails. And then lastly, the third one is I try to be proactive. So I don't want my couples asking me anything. Like if they don't ask any questions, that's awesome, because I want to anticipate the questions that they're going to ask throughout the whole planning process, and then provide the answers before they even know they have the answer or the questions. And that can be, I mean, that 120 something page wedding guide is part of that.
I think you over delivered on that one.
Yeah, a little bit, a
That's
few
awesome.
questions they probably don't even need, but yeah, having those answers, one helps them and like relieve stress because they don't even have to think about these now because they already have the answers. And two, it sets you up as a professional in your industry. And they're like, okay, yeah, we made a great choice. And they're going to tell everyone about you because you're the professional. You know what you're doing, and you answered all these questions before they even had them.
Well, okay, so I was trying to read back through my handwriting here because I was writing
Okay.
quickly as you were talking, but these are good. Again, super practical, simple, practical. Number one, engage them on social media, and it is interesting. People are used to engaging with their friends on social media, so the idea that a vendor would just throw a quick, friendly comment into the conversation on a post might just take it a step further and encouraging that personal relationship. And like you said, some clients
yeah.
may not want that, but if the opportunity is there,
Right.
if that's the vibe that you're trying to create, then a great opportunity to do that. Second, extra communication, especially via email, to provide encouragement and or resources, additional resources. And you were talking earlier about taking notes to keep up with the details associated with their day. If that triggers an idea, a resource, or otherwise that you can pass on to them, great opportunity to further build a relationship that way, to bring really great energy to the relationship. And then third, be proactive in educating and managing expectations. I love that. I think that's super impressive. It's something that I want to continue to do a better job at Photographers Edit, for example, because expectations management, education and expectation management is really one of our biggest challenges. A lot of photographers getting into outsourcing their editing, it's a kind of a foreign concept, and they're nervous and they're apprehensive and they don't have a lot of information, context to go along with it. Certainly, this is the case with a couple, especially if it's their first time getting married. They're like, oh, what do I do? And when it comes to photography, especially, like, I don't know what to do in front of a camera. And they don't know that they're supposed to do it this time of day and the light and all this other stuff if they haven't read about that. So proactive education,
Yes.
expectations management, that's huge. And I love how you summed it up by saying, if they don't ask me any questions, I'm doing a good job. I think that's a brief and really powerful way to sum that up. Thanks for your patience, John. I know that we went over a little bit long, but I appreciate all
No,
the
I've enjoyed this. This has been a lot of fun, and
Well,
I know that I'm long-winded as well.
No, but you shared a lot of very straightforward, practical information, which is, as we were talking about for the podcast, it's my number one goal to hit the podcast. A lot of times it's not about like the super deep, earth-shattering ideas. It's about the simple stuff and showing up and doing that simple stuff consistently that really makes the biggest impact. And I think this conversation highlights that. I really appreciate it. I'm going to pop up the the URLs. That sounds kind of old school. I'm going to pop up your website, the web address here, Light Dark Co. for your podcast. And then also allheartphoto.com for everybody listening in or watching is John's photography website. And then make sure you follow him on Instagram, All Heart Photo on Instagram. We'll link to all this in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. John, I appreciate you making time for this community as well today.
Nathan, thank you so much. This has been amazing.